Brown and his captured soldiers were quickly tried, sentenced, and executed. But before his hanging, Brown received permission to speak. His words reached the nation, inspiring many with his righteous indignation toward slavery. His failed raid ultimately hastened the advent of the Civil War 3 years later.
I have, may it please the court, a few words to say. In the first place, I deny everything but what I have all along admitted, the design on my part to free the slaves. I intended certainly to have made a clean thing of that matter, as I did last winter when I went into Missouri and there took slaves without the snapping of a gun on either side, moved them through the country, and finally left them in Canada. I designed to have done the same thing again on a larger scale. That was all I intended. I never did intend murder or treason or the destruction of property or to excite or incite slaves to rebellion or to make insurrection. I have another objection, and that is, it is unjust that I should suffer such a penalty. Had I interfered in the manner which I admit, and which I admit has been fairly proved, for I admire the truthfulness and candor of the greater portion of the witnesses who have testified in this case, had I so interfered on behalf of the rich, the powerful, the intelligent, the so-called great, or in behalf of their friends, either father, mother, brother, sister, wife, or children, or any of that class, and suffered and sacrificed what I have in this interference, it would have been all right. And every man in this court would have deemed it an act worthy of reward rather than punishment. This court acknowledges, as I suppose, the validity of the law of God. I see a book kissed here, which I suppose to be the Bible, or at least the New Testament. That teaches me that all things whatsoever I would do that men should do to me, I should do even so to them. It teaches me further to remember them that are in bonds as bound with them. I endeavored to act upon that instruction. I say I am yet too young to understand that God is any respecter of persons. I believe that I have interfered as I have done, as I have always freely admitted I have done, in behalf of his despised poor, was not wrong, but right. Now, if it is deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice, and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children, and with the blood of millions in this slave country whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I submit, so let it be done. Let me say one word further. I feel entirely satisfied with the treatment I have received on my trial. Considering all the circumstances, it has been more generous than I expected. But I feel no consciousness of guilt. I have stated that from the first what was my intention and what was not. I never had any design against the life of any person, nor any disposition to commit treason, or excite slaves to rebel, or make any general insurrection. I never encouraged any man to do so, but always discouraged any idea of that kind. Let me say also a word in regard to the statements made by some of those connected with me. I here it has been stated by some of them that I have induced them to join me. But the contrary is true. I do not say this to injure them, but as regarding their weakness. There is not one of them but joined me of his own accord, and the greater part of them at their own expense. A number of them I never saw and never had a word of conversation with till the day they came to me, and that was for the purpose I had stated. Now I have done.
When Brown was hanged, the church bells of Concord rang in mourning. Louisa May Alcott wrote in her diary, "The execution of St. John the Just took place on December 2nd, 1859. Emerson, Thoreau, and Bronson Alcott were full of public admiration for Brown, who now seemed to be a kind of secular saint. Alcott, who would not eat a fish for the agony it would cause the fish, went into mourning for a man who had heartlessly ordered others to be hacked to pieces. He and Thoreau spoke of Brown as a martyr worthy of the glories of the cross. As the decades passed, Brown's fame and reputation were affirmed again and again and reflected in a popular song we sang earlier in the service. In the 20th century, black scholar and leader W.E.B. Du Bois described John Brown as the man who of all Americans has perhaps come nearest to touching the real souls of black folk. John Brown worked not simply for black men, he worked with them, and he was companion to their daily life and felt, as few white Americans have felt, the bitter tragedy of their lot.
Now, as we celebrate Barack Obama's inauguration, we look back with awe and consternation at a man who may have been pivotal in making this day possible. Brown was a zealot. Brown was a murderer. In our day, Brown would probably be called a terrorist. Brown believed that the end of freeing the slaves justified his means. Nevertheless, many of the values he espoused are the values we hold dear. Few of us would have the courage to drive a horse-drawn wagon through the Adirondack winter night to carry slaves for freedom. Few of us would have the courage to martyr ourselves and our children to free other people from bondage. As we look at John Brown's life, we must ask ourselves, how far are we willing to go? What will we do to live out our principles? To use the language that we heard in the song, the language of Brown's time, how can we be instruments in God's hand? And now we'll sing the hymn. The number is